Rahu and Ketu are often going to be conjunct Graha, the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, or Saturn. Whenever you see Rahu or Ketu conjuncting a planet, you better believe that that planet is going to be really, really important to them this lifetime. And it'll usually be really important because it suffers a lot. You know, Rahu and Ketu are cruel planets, and the planets they join with suffer some cruelty or unhappiness. Now, the type of unhappiness that a conjunction with Ketu gives is very, very different from the issues that a conjunction with Rahu gives. But in either case, a planet conjunct Rahu or Ketu, that's going to be an important planet. If that planet's in bad dignity, it'll tend to be important because it causes a lot of suffering, very difficult events, and possible tragedies in their lives. And if it's in good dignity, it can indicate some really great strengths they have to offer, or some great strengths that they're developing. Okay, but in either case, it's going to be an important planet. Ketu and Rahu, they're that evolutionary path of our consciousness. And so anytime we get a planet in the same sign as Ketu or Rahu, that planet is a big part of that path. Now, when you get a planet, let's say the Sun, conjunct with Ketu, then that Sun becomes a part of the foundation of their past. Okay, their past securities. Remember, Ketu is always where, in our recent past lifetimes, our consciousness has clung to security. So any planets it's joined with represents a planet that we have clung to security with. And that planet will be something we tend to cling to for the first 42 years of our lives very strongly until that Rahu matures. But even though we'll cling to that thing, we never really feel completely secure with that planet. Okay, because again, where Ketu is, though we may cling to it out of security, it's never the ultimate security that we're seeking. And so it presents difficulties. And the type of difficulties any planet conjunct Ketu tends to have is it creates some disappointment. Okay? So, just based on the nature of the planet, when it's conjunct Ketu, you can be sure the person will seek deep security in that planet because they're in the habit of finding security with that planet, but not finding that ultimate security, they're going to find themselves being disappointed. So if it's Venus, they'll be disappointed in marriage. If it's Jupiter, they'll be disappointed philosophically, and so on. Alright, so starting with the Sun. And I'm going to go really quickly through some high points of different conjunctions with Rahu and Ketu. But also, I wrote up quite a bit for you all that you can just read. So a lot of stuff I'm not going to cover in the videos because it's written down in a handout at the top of this video for you to peruse more easily. Okay, before I get into Ketu conjunctions, like I said, they're going to create disappointment because the security need's not completely realized. Rahu, on the other hand, doesn't create that same type of disappointment. Rahu literally causes wounding pain. You know, like pull my heart out and step on it and kick it across the universe type pain. Okay? So it's so much more painful in general to have planets conjunct Rahu than Ketu. These planets don't become disappointing the way a Sun-Ketu planet does, where it's kind of disappointed and you let it go and you're sort of sad like it's done, it's over with. Rahu creates the type of pain that you really, really, really want to do something about, but you can't. Okay, or you really, 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 really wish it was this way, but it's just not going to be that way. Or you really, really hope for this, but it's not going to happen. So you invest your whole future into that planet conjunct that's conjunct Rahu. All your hopes, dreams, and desires get invested in that planet. And you want that planet so much, and when you don't get it, it's agonizing. Okay? So with any planet that's conjunct Rahu, now that's a planet that's being developed this lifetime, just like the house Rahu's in and the sign it's in. It's a dark area. It's an area we have no expertise, no concrete experience, we don't go about those things successfully. Okay, we need to develop that planet, and until it's developed, we're going to use it wrong, and part of that means engaging in that planet in a way that guarantees pain and suffering. Okay? Planets conjuncting Rahu oftentimes will indicate huge tragedies in a person's life. Okay? Alright, so Sun Ketu conjunction. This is the person who's found security in their recent past life simply through their power as an individual. So they'll be marked by a strong sense of individuality along with subconscious feelings of self-doubt. And these people have spent so much trying to create their own destiny, be responsible for their lives, for how their life is created, be responsible for their destiny, that they've gotten to the point where they doubt everything they do. Why? Well, because you think you're responsible for creating your own destiny, you create your own destiny, and at the end of that you're still unhappy, right? So of course you're going to doubt your capacity to create your own destiny. You're going to have a lot of self-doubts and inhibitions. The most difficult planet to have conjunct Ketu is the Sun. Okay, in astrology we say Ketu, even though Ketu and Rahu both will swallow the Sun and Moon during eclipse, Ketu really likes to swallow the Sun the most, and Rahu likes to swallow the Moon the most. So it's really the Sun is the most difficult planet to have with Ketu. A lot of self-doubts, and it really indicates a person that as long as they have any attachment to who they are as an individual, they're going to have doubts about everything they do. And Ketu's job is to cause liberation. So any planet he's with, we want to become liberated from the need of that planet. We want to be liberated from that planet, and we want to find liberation in that planet. Remember, I always say Ketu is the first place you're going to find God. So Ketu Sun conjunction, until that person doesn't see themselves as an individual who's striving for perfection, because there's that tendency with Ketu Sun conjunctions for a person to strive for personal perfection in everything they do, but always failing. So when Ketu Sun does something wonderful and everyone says, oh, that was great, you did amazing, what the Ketu Sun person hears is, or what they feel is, well, the 3% that they miss from perfection. Okay? And the truth is, there is no perfect moment. There is no perfect time. There is no perfect thing. There's always some afflictions. And, you know, Ketu Sun needs to redefine perfection. It's not them being perfect. It's not them doing a perfect deed. Perfection is, in fact, when everyone's karmas comes together to fulfill each other, adjusted by any pluses and minuses based on the merit they've achieved or demerit they've earned this lifetime. And whatever that is, however good or bad, that creates a situation. That's the perfect situation. Okay? So when Sun Ketu sees themselves not as the doer, but more as the player, more as the actor, to fulfill the role that's placed upon them, and not the one who's creating that role and determining the success of that role, but simply one that's playing that role, then they stop having these huge self-doubts. And Sun Ketu conjunctions, their self-doubts can be so strong they become paralyzing. They actually can keep a person from fulfilling their ambitions, goals, and dreams in life. Okay? They can be very, very paralyzed people. But what they need to learn is to express themselves as an individual, realizing that that individuality is a spark of God. That's what the Sun is, the Atman, the soul of all. And that it's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to be individual. If everyone was perfect, everyone would be doing the same thing, right? So individuality, which means an individual soul, to have that individuality requires imperfection. Okay? And for them to realize that they need to be who they are and not perfect. And then the doubts can disappear and they can move on from there. I wrote more about that position too, but the main thing is huge self-doubts to the point of possibly being debilitating, with a need to detach themselves from their role as the doer and the creator of their own destiny. Okay? Now Rahu Sun people, they're so easy to recognize, because these people are just so magnetic. They're just magnetic people. And they tend to have this aura of confidence and strength about them. But the thing about Rahu is, Rahu creates illusions. He's the illusionist, okay, the master of illusions. And honestly, any planet that's conjunct Rahu appears better than it is. Okay? So you see the strength and magnetism of a Sun Rahu individual. And you'll find lots and lots of women are strongly attracted to men with Sun Rahu conjunctions, because these men look so confident and act so confident and appear so magnetic in their confidence. So women are naturally attracted to them. But the truth is, it's an illusion. Whatever planet conjuncts Rahu is a planet that's not developed. Okay? It's not truly developed. So the Rahu Sun person is really not very confident. Deep down inside, they're just quivering in their shoes over everything they do until they develop some true self-esteem. The confidence they have is not a sincere confidence of who they really are, because that's what the Sun wants to be. It wants to be its individual self. Their confidence is more an idea of what they believe they are or what they've been told that they are. I oftentimes find people who have Sun Rahu conjunctions are people who, growing up, were somehow told they were better than other people, or put in situations where they were treated special, or coming from families who thought they were better than the other people on the block and things like that. So these people have this sort of false confidence that's not based on anything they've done, anything they've achieved, but just this idea that they're somehow wonderful and great and that the world is there to serve them. Okay? But deep down inside, they have no individuality, they have no true confidence with respect to themselves. And it takes a long time for these people to really be comfortable with themselves. Until that point, they tend to try to be proving themselves all the time. They try to do great things, they try to acquire power and control. And in anything they do, they naturally think everything is there for them. So these people oftentimes will have center of the universe syndrome. And a lot of people just follow these people. But they're really not as strong. They're not a true king yet. It'll take some time for them to become a true king. Now, if the Sun is in good dignity, over time they can become a great leader and a great person and a person with esteem. But it takes time for them to find who they really are enough, to find out who their esteem is even based on. And usually their esteem is based on things that are not truly who they are. So they may be confident, and have this sense of personal assurance based on things that are not even who they really are, but based on things that are maybe their fathers or something, or some belief system they've adopted, whatever. So it takes these people a long time to find out who they really are and be confident in who they really are. And they usually have to have some huge breaks in their life before they realize that. By breaks, I mean separating from parents or things like that, going on their own path for a while to find out and discover who they are. Okay. So that's Sun. That's the Sun. Then we've got the Moon. Okay. Moon Ketu conjunction. These are great people in the sense that they're really easy to get along with. They don't cause a lot of trouble. They don't get over emotional. They don't get needy. They're emotionally controlled. But that's their problem. They're too emotionally controlled. They're too emotionally introverted to the point where they're not able to really share their feelings completely with people. So they tend to feel disconnected from other people. Again, that Moon is that planet that we use to connect with everybody. When it's joined a cruel planet, Ketu or Rahu or Saturn, we just can't connect fully to a person. So Ketu Moon always has their deepest emotions in reserve. Okay? Afflictions to the Moon tend to be more painful in a woman's chart and cause more trouble in their lives than in a man's chart. But in either case, a Ketu Moon person is just not inclined to share their deepest feelings and pains. They'll just go deal with it on their own. They tend to be great at cheering other people up, having great attitudes, not getting down by things happening around them. And they can cheer people up real well. But when they themselves are hurting, they can't be cheered up. When they themselves need help, they can't receive help. They're just emotionally an isolated person. Their emotions, their moon, and their feelings are just hidden behind this wall. And occasionally, the pain of life will build up, and they'll have breakdowns for an hour a day where they'll just cry for an hour or pull their hair out for a day. Excuse me. And then all of a sudden they'll get up and be done and over with it. So they really are inclined to process their own emotions and process their own feelings. Women with this combination tend to have a hard time in relationships simply because for a woman to have a good relationship, she has to have the courage to show what she feels. Okay? If she doesn't have that, then the man can't figure out how to treat her right. Okay? And so not knowing how to treat her right, he's going to treat her wrong, and they'll be unhappy. Okay? So women with Moon Ketu positions really, really have to learn how to be more open emotionally and show their feelings and find someone they can trust their feelings and more. trust their feelings with more, or else they're going to always sort of feel alone in the relationship, and they'll always feel like something's missing. And when there's something's missing, it'll make the girl not want to be there in the relationship because she feels something's missing. And I've had cases where, you know, the men have gone, hey, let's go get counseling and see what's going wrong in a relationship, or let's talk about it, or tell me what's wrong. And the Moon Ketu girl will literally say, I don't want to talk about it, or nothing's going wrong. Just cut the guy off and not give him a chance. So this is a bit of a painful, difficult position for a relationship. But usually, the Moon Ketu girl can have a pretty decent relationship, at least for a while, because she's not over-emotional. She bites her own pain. She suffers in silence. So like I said, Ketu Moon people are easy to get along with. But there always comes a time where people want that deeper connectivity. And that's usually what makes or breaks the Moon Ketu thing in the Moon Ketu relationship, when people want more intimacy. Now in a man's chart, you know, the Ketu Moon indicates a man who's very controlled in his emotions, who's very inclined to, you know, pay attention to the woman's feelings, who doesn't have to have all his feelings met, who's very happy to have the woman's feelings met for. So it is a bit of a more difficult things in a woman's chart, okay? Just like the Sun Ketu conjunction in a woman's chart will give her a good solid backbone usually, but it won't give her as many painful doubts and feelings of vulnerability as it will in a man's chart. Because again, the Sun is more important in men, and the Moon is more important in women. Okay, Moon Rahu. Again, Rahu is the illusionist. So when you get a Moon Rahu conjunction, you get this illusion of femininity, which is the Moon. So in a woman's chart, Moon Rahu women appear very beautiful and feminine, and men are just drawn to Moon Rahu women. You'll find that a majority of the sex symbols, the great sex symbols of the, you know, of the century, have Moon Rahu conjunctions. Pamela Anderson had Moon Rahu conjunction. Aishwarya Rai from India has Moon Rahu conjunction. Lots of girls do. I regularly see it where women with Rahu Moon conjunctions always have more men that want them, who think they're more beautiful than they really are, who think they're more desirable than they really are, compared to women who were equally attractive, equally desirable without the Moon Rahu conjunction. So this really makes women attractive to men when you see this conjunction. The problem with it is, any planet conjunct the Moon is the planet, or Rahu is a planet that's under development. So a Rahu Moon conjunction really shows someone who's developing the female side, the feminine half of their psyche. Okay? So men usually find themselves frustrated with Moon Rahu women because they end up finding she's just not as feminine as she appeared. Okay? And while Moon Rahu women are going to be very emotional, they're very rarely showing their true emotion. So it can be really frustrating men. They think, oh, there's this totally emotional girl, I'm totally into her. But after a while they realize that everything she shows emotionally is not really her true feelings. And so it doesn't give the man, if he wants it, a lot to work with. Again, Rahu creates that illusion of feelings. But what are feelings? Feelings are what we're truly experiencing in our heart. Anything else that's emotional is really not a feeling. It's just bullshit to cover up the feeling. And that's what Moon Rahu often does. So while it seems like it's really emotional, it really seems like it's showing its feelings, it's never showing its real, true first feeling, which means it's not really showing any feelings that are worth hearing about. Okay? Now, in a man's chart, Moon Rahu conjunction just makes him emotionally more cut off. It makes it harder for the man to be sensitive to other people. As a result, they innately will not treat women as well. They just won't have the sensitivity to know how they make somebody else feel. Okay? A man uses his moon to be aware of other people's feelings around him. He's sensitive to other people's needs. And by that, he's able to be the best man and do the right thing so everyone is as happy and taken care of as possible. Because the sun is the king, right? So the sun's job is to take care of everyone else. How does he know what everyone else needs? Well, he uses his moon to find out what everyone else's needs. So in a man's chart, when you get the Moon Rahu conjunction there, he is just not tuned into other people. he's in his own little world, and he only can see his own needs. He can't see the needs of the people around him, whether his children, the people he's responsible for, his peers, or his woman. Okay? So they'll be more emotionally cut off. And they themselves there'll be a tendency towards out of control emotional experiences. Again, a flaunting of feelings. And so Moon Rahu men just tend to have a hard time being really aware of other people's feelings. Okay? It's a difficult one. And it just takes a lot of time in either case. A woman with Moon Rahu conjunction just has to learn to develop her feminine side, which means listen to what's in her heart, basically. And a man with Moon Rahu conjunction just needs to learn to pay attention to other people around him. Literally pay attention to other people, learn how to connect and merge with other people more. Okay? Either way, Moon Rahu conjunction is really painful. Beaver Rahman used to go to the extent of saying anyone with a Moon Rahu conjunction is insane. Okay? That's not necessarily true. You will find some people who do great things with Moon Rahu conjunction. Gandhi had a Moon Rahu conjunction. But you will find that anyone with a Moon Rahu conjunction is going to be either insane, just peculiar in their behavior and mentality, or just a little bit crazy. But sometimes being a little bit crazy helps you do great things, like in the case of Gandhi. So these people will often be extreme in their behaviors. In general, there's a tendency towards extremes in anything they do. But if they take the extreme in the right thing, then a Moon Rahu conjunction can help them with that. Okay? But these people also need to just get more strong in their ego, in their sense of self. The moon is the manas, where the jiva lives, which is the living being, the human part of ourself, along with ahankara, which is the ego. So the moon is, Rahu really shows development of the ego, development of a self that's able to connect with the world and universe around them, honestly, based on how that self actually feels and what's actually going through that self's consciousness. With Moon Rahu conjunction in a woman's chart shows a woman who doesn't really share her honest first feelings, but she shares lots of feelings. In a man's chart, it usually shows someone who doesn't share a lot of feelings, but does have emotional episodes, okay, or gets emotionally overwhelmed at things. So it's a very difficult conjunction wherever you look at it, but it tends to cause more disaster in a woman's life, because Moon Rahu conjunction in a woman's life, because she's not always paying attention to her first and true feeling, will cause her to choose things in her life that she doesn't really feel good about and which are damaging to her. A man, whether he's going to do that or not, a lot of it depends more on the well-being of the sun. And again, like I said, sun with Ketu is more difficult in a man's chart. But either case, the sun with Ketu and moon with Rahu are the two most difficult conjunctions that we can have. Okay. Mars is the next one. Mars is that warrior planet. And Mars feels very at home with Ketu. Okay? Mars-Ketu conjunction is probably, I'd say, the easiest conjunction to have with Ketu. Why? Well, because they're siblings in a way. The presiding deity of Ketu is Ganesha, and the presiding deity of Mars is Skanda, Ganesha's little brother. And of course, Ketu gives the results of Mars. So Mars-Ketu conjunctions are probably, if you're going to have a planet conjunct Ketu, the easiest to handle, because they're just so much on the same wavelength. Mars is the general, Ketu is the army that the general can lead strategically. So these people are very strategic, big planners, great overseers, great managers, generally powerful in getting things done. Okay? They tend to be peaceful in how they deal with things, but they oftentimes have dreams and subconscious thoughts of big violence in their lives. Okay, I oftentimes see Mars-Ketu people actually have nightmares that are very violent, that they don't even know where they come from. They're like the most peaceful people in the world. Remember, Ketu always hides anything it's with. So Ketu Mars will hide its anger, hide its frustration, and bottle it up. But that bottling up can, of course, end up in a huge explosion at some point. So these people do need to know how to let loose and blow off some steam when they need to. Generally, I find these people really, really benefit from a lot of physical discipline, a lot of exercise, just to burn out that extra fire that can get built up in them because they hold on to anger and frustration emotionally a little bit. But other than that, these Mars Ketu people tend to be hard workers, focused in what they want to achieve, and very capable of achieving most things they put their minds to. Okay? Certainly these difficult. Rahu-Mars conjunction, now that can be a tough one. Okay? This can show a person who has anger issues, to put it simply. They're learning how to develop their focus, the use of their will, the focused use of their will. They're learning to find out what they should fight for and what they shouldn't fight for. And so there's a tendency with Mars-Rahu conjunctions to instantly jump into any fight, any battle it wants to get heated really quickly because, you know, Rahu emphasizes any planets it's with. So these people can seem really willful, really strong-willed, strong-minded. But when it comes down to it, they're really not. Rahu's an illusion. But they're developing their strength. They're developing where to focus their will and how to focus it. Ultimately, the most important thing about Mars is where we're going to focus Mars on. Mars is a planet of fixing things and of fighting when there's trouble in our life. And the most important thing about fighting or fixing things is understanding, is this battle worth fighting? Is this thing worth fixing? And that's a big lesson that Mars-Rahu has to understand. So they'll oftentimes, you know, get involved in battles for the sake of the fight, not for the sake of the rewards of the battle. These people need to learn, you know, what do I hope to get out of this by winning? Do I even want the rewards of winning this war? And oftentimes it's like, no, I don't even care if I win. I'm just arguing and fighting this battle and pushing because I don't know what else to do. So they need to get more strategic and logical about how they use their will, about what they're going to fight into, and what they're going to focus their energies in life, you know. Rahu-Mars can also just be your typical bad soldier, where he's got nothing to focus on, so he sits around and squanders his life away with cards and booze, and women if he's lucky enough. So these people need to learn what to focus their will on, you know, to create a strategy in their lives of what they want to accomplish through the use of their will, and also, as the challenges come to life, what is worth fighting for and what's worth just turning their backs on. Okay? But these Mars-Rahu tends to be inclined towards proving their will, and so they oftentimes will fight just to prove themselves and get into conflicts just to prove themselves rather than to prove a point or to do something important. So that's what they need to learn how to do. Okay, Mercury. Mercury is an interesting planet. When he's conjunct Ketu or Rahu, you almost always find Ketu or Rahu will just do a little bit better. There's just something about Mercury that helps Ketu and Rahu see the greater possibilities of the situation. And that's what both the Rahu and Ketu need. In some way, they all need to learn to see the best possibilities and take the most of them. I think the reason Mercury tends to do better with Ketu or Rahu, or makes Ketu or Rahu do better, is because Mercury is Vishnu. You know, he's Vishnu. And of course, Rahu is Adisesha. Okay, the thousand-headed serpent, that's the presiding deity of Rahu. And Vishnu is the presiding deity of Mercury. And in myth, we always find when Vishnu incarnates, Adisesha always incarnates with him. So we had Krishna, which was Vishnu, with his brother Balarama, who was an incarnation of Adisesha. Okay? Then we had Lord Rama, who was Vishnu, Mercury, who incarnated with Lakshman, who was an incarnation of Adisesha. Okay, so you see this regularly in myth, where they always incarnate down together in the myths. And, you know, Vishnu always sort of helps get the most and best out of Adisesha, out of Rahu. So, of course, when Mercury is conjunct Ketu, it makes a strong aspect to Rahu. And when Mercury is conjunct Rahu, it's right there. So while Mercury does need some help when it's with a Rahu or Ketu, it always tends to help open up Rahu and Ketu to the greater possibilities. So these people usually tackle their Rahu Ketu issues in a more effective way. Okay? Alright, so when Mercury's conjunct Ketu, this is a person who has emphasized finding security through their intellect, through their ability to try things, test things, and to investigate things. They have a very deep-minded, investigative mentality. They make great detectives and things like that. They're very good at research and probing into things. They're very good at doing trial and error things. And they've gotten to the point in their incarnation where they've learned, because they've learned so much, that the only thing they know is that they don't really know anything. You know what I mean? You know how we study astrology? In the first 6 months, we're learning it, and we go, gosh, I know so much about astrology, even though I've only been studying 6 months. And then 20 years later, you realize, geez, I don't know anything about astrology. You know? That's what Ketu Mercury is like. The more we learn about something, the only thing we ultimately learn is how much more there is to learn, how much we don't know compared to what we know. When we start something, it looks like we know a lot and we only need to learn a little more. But the more we study it, it looks like we know so little and there's yet so much to learn. So Ketu Mercury really has that feeling. So it always doubts its knowledge, always doubts its information. And while it's very good at debating and proving its point and explaining why the thing it thinks is the correct thing, whenever it'll actually get episodes in their life, the Mercury Ketu person they'll explain something wonderfully, and then they'll leave and they'll go, wait a minute, I'm not sure that was right. And they'll have this huge breakdown of, was that even true? Was that even right? That'll throw them into a whole other batch of research or study or investigation. So they're not really secure in their information and knowledge, because they've got to the point that the only thing they know for sure is that they don't know anything. So the Ketu Mercury person simply has to learn, given the task at hand, they just have to know enough to get the job done. Okay? They don't have to know everything. We just have to know enough to get the job done. And getting the job done does not mean doing a perfect job or making perfect predictions or reading a perfect horoscope if you're an astrologer. Getting the job done means fulfilling the karmic requirements of that moment so that everyone gets what they've deserved karmically, as modified by any pluses and minuses, any merits and demerits that they've earned this lifetime. And that's a perfect moment. And lots of times that's not a very good moment. Okay? But that's what they need to learn, that they have enough information to do what they're supposed to do in the next moment. And that's all that matters. At that point, then Mercury can start feeling secure again about fulfilling its roles and responsibilities. Otherwise, Mercury will have a hard time making decisions because they're really aware and having nagging doubts about, is this really the right thing? Is this really true? Okay? Mercury-Rahu conjunctions tend to be very experimental people. And they'll have all kinds of ideas. Okay? The difference is, the Mercury-Rahu person will have all kinds of ideas to do things and investigate things and to play with things, but they won't have any vision of where those ideas may lead. Okay? You know, for instance, whenever someone does a science project, in a scientific way, we're supposed to come up with a theory, right? That we test or investigate. And the theory means we have an idea that something's true, and we set out to test it. And that's what a Ketu Mercury person is really good at. Okay? Based on their information and knowledge, they've decided this is probably true, now I need to test it. They have a theory that they're trying to prove or disprove. The Mercury-Rahu person will try anything, test anything, but without any vision of what may happen. So the Mercury-Ketu person will go into the lab and say, I think if I mix these two chemicals, I'm going to get this result. Let me go test it. And they'll very carefully mix those two chemicals, and something will happen. Well, the Mercury-Rahu person goes, I wonder what will happen when I mix these two chemicals, and dumps them into a big bucket together, and God knows what's going to happen, right? And of course, that can be a little dangerous at times. So sometimes the Mercury-Rahu person can be so much into jumping into things and just to see what's going to happen that they can get themselves into trouble in life. They might mismanage some of their affairs. They'll seem like they have all kinds of ideas, which they do have. They're full of ideas to investigate. But will any of those ideas really pan out? Oftentimes not, okay? Because they don't have an established theory to where they want those ideas to go. So they need to learn more of a long-term focus of what am I hoping to achieve, and to harness their ideas to support what they want to achieve, and not just to jump into things because it's a new idea or a new thing or something that seems fun. Okay? So while these Mercury Rahu people can be really exciting because they are just so mercurial in a fun way, after a while their lives can get tedious if they don't actually get anywhere. Okay? So they have to learn how to take their skills and direct it towards something that can give them a concrete, useful experience or something in their lives, and not just for the sake of seeing what happens next. Okay? Okay, Jupiter. Jupiter conjunct Ketu usually gives strong, innate, religious, or idealistic belief systems. I see lots and lots of times Jupiter Ketu people come into this life and they want to become nuns or monks or things like that. There's usually some strong spiritual tendencies. But remember what I said, any planet with Ketu always gets disappointed. So the Ketu Jupiter person always finds somehow that their belief system disappoints them. And so they're not able to embrace that belief system completely. Why? Because they're not meant to find their ultimate security in a belief system. Wherever Ketu is, we want ultimate security, but we're not meant to find it there, not on planet Earth anywhere. So the Ketu Jupiter person is looking for that ultimate belief system that exists on planet Earth, that perfect ashram, whatever, that ultimate belief system that really makes them feel secure and happy. Doesn't exist on Earth. So they have to learn that the ultimate belief system is ultimately different for everybody. And they need to develop and find out what that really is for them and live really true to their own beliefs, okay, and their own visions of what's true and what's ideal, okay? And that the perfect belief system, well, they'll encounter that when they become enlightened. Then they'll have the perfect belief system and understand perfectly. But until then, no belief system is going to give them that perfect philosophy or understanding they want. But they need it so much that they tend to be disappointed when their belief system doesn't give it to them. Okay? So eventually these people need to learn to believe for themselves with the faith that, you know, God will come to them based on how they believe and how they really are, and not based upon them believing something that they can find in Earth and get supported by on Earth. You know, because you can get two Christians and start talking philosophy, and they'll start having differences of opinions, right? Okay? You get two Hindus who talk about philosophy, and they'll have different ideas about certain things. So our belief systems just are not going to get completely validated by anything. What we personally believe will be different. So these people need to sort of embrace that individual part of themselves and not expect to find that, you know, philosophical bliss through anything they can find on Earth. And that can be disappointing. But these people always tend to have a solid philosophical and spiritual core. You know, I always find them to be good, solid people that way. Okay? And they tend to have integrity. You know, they have, you know, moral and philosophical integrity. Okay? Which is kind of a nice thing. Jupiter-Rahu conjunction, on the other hand, this is someone who's in desperate need of fulfilling and finding a meaningful belief system and something meaningful to believe in. They oftentimes get really psyched up about things only to feel not very, only to feel not great purpose from those things down the road. So Jupiter-Rahu people, they oftentimes will behave like they really believe what they're doing, or they really believe in this guru or this teaching, or they really believe in the purpose of their lives, which are things Jupiter wants to give us. But they don't really believe it. Okay? And that's shown because eventually that doesn't work for them. They abandon it and go on to something else. So while these people may exhibit really strong beliefs at certain times, they're usually not truly rooted in those beliefs. They want so desperately to believe something that they very easily believe something that's simply not true to who they really are. Okay? And it just takes some time to find out what, you know, to believe, what really, you know, vibes with them philosophically, and what path for them really to be on. This is a very difficult combination in a woman's chart, because Jupiter is the husband. So women with Rahu-Jupiter conjunctions regularly fall in love with men who are just not worthwhile partners. See it all the time. Great combination, great girls with the Rahu-Jupiter conjunction. And you just say, look, the reason you're not married at 40 is because honestly you just keep falling in love with men that aren't good. You know, and they're like, no kidding. So Jupiter-Rahu women tend to attract the wrong types of men. They do lots of Shiva mantras and things that boost that Jupiter and have Shiva pick out a worthwhile husband or man for them. And because of that, women with Jupiter-Rahu conjunction often get themselves in a world of hurt by becoming married or getting involved with the wrong man. Lots of single mothers will have this. So they end up getting pregnant with the guy who's not going to stick around, who can't support the family. And there could be difficulty around raising the children along with that partner, and oftentimes, like I said, the partner's not there. So Jupiter-Rahu can have tragic life-altering effects in a woman's chart, to where she has huge burdens because she depended on a man that simply didn't come through for her. So Jupiter-Rahu women really need to take their time picking out a mate. They really need to get the compatibility checked, and they need to really take a step back and do a good job of seeing if this person's right for them. Because there's a tendency for them to simply believe in the wrong man too easily. Okay? To see that what they want to believe is good about the man and miss the parts that are going to ruin the relationship. Okay. Venus. Ketu Venus is a person who's found a lot of security in their past lives and relationships. Pretty simply. Okay? These people tend to be great diplomats. They tend to carry themselves with a good, healthy pride. I often find these people tend to have a sort of elegance to them. You know, they have a sort of strength with their Venus. Okay? But they eventually find disappointment in those things. They eventually find disappointment in their beauty, disappointment in their grace, disappointment in what they can get out of married life. Okay? This is a combination that is actually sometimes very supportive of renunciation, where people can realize that, you know, love is so limiting, and beauty and, you know, and joy between two people is limited to what this Venus really wants. So it can awaken a lot of deep spiritual devotion at times. And ultimately, Ketu Venus person needs to learn to some degree to really be happy to have a divine romance, you know, to have a devotional relationship with some aspect of the divine. Because human relationships will have an element of disappointment. I've seen them have good relationships, but there's still a nagging sense of disappointment, of not complete fulfillment. Okay? Venus-Rahu people, on the other hand, they tend to have a really hard time getting into a good relationship. Okay? They oftentimes get involved with partners who are just, in general, not going to be validating, or which take too much work, or which aren't going to work out. And you'll see Venus-Rahu people tend to go through a lot of relationships, especially men with Venus-Rahu conjunctions tend to have lots of women in their lifetime, more often than not. They just tend to have lots of relationships. And no matter how many women they have, they rarely find satisfaction in any of them. Okay? Sometimes at some point Rahu, Venus will just give up because there's, you know, but rarely, you know, occasionally a Rahu, Venus man will give up on relationships because they just can't find that special woman. But usually they just keep on looking. So it's not a great thing for stability in marriage life, because the person has a hard time simply finding peace with any particular partner. A lot of that is because with Rahu Venus there, they don't really know what they really need in a relationship. They don't really know what is worthy in a woman to them. So no matter what woman they're with, they can't find the value of her because they don't know what's important to them to begin with. And so lots of times what ends up happening is that their relationship with women just revolves around sex, which is an obvious valuable commodity to lots of men. But they don't understand any of the other valuable commodities that a woman has to offer, which is really what keeps a man. You know, great sex never kept any man. It's the man who sees and recognizes the other virtues and values of a woman that decides to keep her. And men with Rahu Venus just have a hard time seeing that because they don't even know what they really want from a woman. And so not knowing what they really want from a woman, the only thing that's left to want is the biological part, the sexual part, the biological and chemical part, which everyone wants because that's just indigenous to being a mammal. Okay? So, you know, these men usually have to do a lot of introspection and, you know, come to a lot of understanding about women before they're really ready to pick a woman or have a mature relationship. In a woman's chart, Rahu-Venus conjunction usually shows a woman who's working on her self-worth, who usually gives a lot more of herself to a relationship than she gains back. So a tendency to get involved in relationships where she just doesn't get validated as a woman. Okay? So in neither case is it a good combination. And actually it's a pretty tough combination in most cases, the Venus-Rahu one. Venus is such a planet that our happiness depends upon. And Venus, more than any other planet, is capable of giving the biggest happiness. Parashar tells us that the most benefic, most gentle, enjoyable planet of all is Venus. Jupiter's in second place. So Venus has the capacity to give greater happiness than any other planet. And then you stick it with Rahu, who always delays things and who's always going to, you know, show you something that you're just not going to manage well. It just shows a person who's not going to manage their happiness with people well. And in a woman's chart, that means usually giving more of herself than she's validated for or than she deserves back. And so it creates a lot of room for unhappiness. Okay, difficult combination. Now, any planet that's conjunct Rahu, okay, Rahu's a delaying factor in the chart. Okay. So any planet conjunct Rahu, we never going to get the best of that thing early in life. It always gets delayed. So you get people with Rahu, Jupiter, conjunction woman, early marriages never work for them. Or you get Venus, Rahu conjunctions in anyone's chart, early marriages usually are just not a good idea. It usually makes them have to wait for relationships and marriage. Any planet with Ketu, well, that may be something we get early. The things that the planets conjunct Ketu are rarely things we're going to keep throughout our life. So you get, you know, Jupiter with Ketu in a woman's chart. She's rarely going to keep her husband her whole life. Or Venus in a woman's chart, or a man's chart for that matter. Rarely will they be married, you know, their whole life. Okay? In fact, Venus Ketu, lots of times you'll see people during the second half of their life who have nothing to do with marriage at all. While in the first half of their life, they're always with somebody. And then later on, they're always alone. You'll see that sometimes. So with Ketu, it's the planet of completions. Okay? And so we often resolve and complete things with Ketu and then don't have a whole lot of that, or shift into doing it with somebody else. So, you know, Ketu will resolve things and complete things. But usually when Ketu resolves and completes something, we have a sense of peace with it and we're ready to move on or to be alone or whatever. Rahu, on the other hand, is what we call a separative influence, as well as of a delaying influence. It's also an influence of separation. So it separates us from the things it affects. So any planet conjunct Rahu, we're going to get separated from. At some point in our lives, we'll get separated from it. Okay? It's just a matter of how severe is the separation going to be. Is it just a couple of years of two people living in another country? Or a couple of years of living away from the children? Or is it a lifetime? It depends on the severity. But it will separate us from things. So rarely will you find a woman who's got Rahu Jupiter who stays with the first man she meets. She'll get separated from him. And same thing, you won't see a man with Rahu Venus who doesn't separate from the first few women he's with usually. And you rarely see anyone with Rahu Venus who stays married through their first marriage. Okay, unless Rahu and Venus are really supported. Then they can go through the changes together that Rahu is going to bring. But usually the changes Rahu brings are so different that the person realizes they need something completely different. And so they separate from it. Or their partner realizes they need something completely different and separates them the hard way. So it's very painful. And when Rahu separation occurs, it's usually a very painful separation. Ketu completing things is not like getting something ripped out of us. It's more just like a natural process of letting something go. Whereas with Rahu, it gets pulled. It's very painful. All right, then we get Saturn-Ketu. Saturn-Ketu conjunctions always represent people who are very capable of controlling things. Okay, they just are very good managers. They're very capable of controlling and managing lots of things. There's a tendency for them to work hard to try to create security. Yet at the same time, there's always a tendency to never feel like they're quite in control enough. So Ketu Saturn people actually need to loosen up a little bit and just let things go with the flow a little more. You know, there could just be such a desire to have everything controlled so it's all solid that that's just not possible. That's death, right? When things are controlled to the point of solidity, that's death. Life is about change and things about being out of control and about going with the flow with things. And the Saturn-Ketu person always has to learn to do more of that. If they don't, they just feel really stressed and nerve-wracked because they're just trying to handle so much above and beyond what's their responsibility. And so there's a tendency to be overly responsible. So these people just need to loosen up, go with the flow more, let things take their own course a little bit more. And then they'll be a lot better off. Saturn Rahu, well, that's a tough conjunction because Rahu's a separating planet, Saturn's a separating planet, Rahu's a delaying planet, and so is Saturn. So you get a double whammy of separation and delays. So any house that got Saturn Rahu in it, it's going to be delayed until you get any great fruits from that house. And anything you have in that house, you're likely to be separated from it at some point in your life, whether temporarily or permanently, depending on how bad these planets are situated. Saturn Rahu people actually need to learn how to have a healthy degree of responsibility. Okay? There'll be a tendency to either be completely irresponsible or to be over-controlling to the point that they're guaranteed to lose whatever they hope to achieve. Okay? So these people need to learn to be responsible without being overbearing. And they also need to learn how to, most importantly, they need to learn how to invest their time wisely into their futures. There's a tendency with Rahu Saturn people to not have the patience to make things fructify in life. Things take time in life. And so when they don't get instant results, because Saturn always creates deep needs, and so does Rahu. So Rahu and Saturn together, you just have such a deep psychological need and also just such a deep desire for that you want it right then and there. And if you don't get it right then and there, you're just going to freak out and try to get it somewhere else. But Saturn's all about persevering, continuing on no matter what happens until you realize your reward. And so that's what these people need to learn how to do. They need to learn how to focus their desire in a persevering, long-term way, knowing that they'll get there when they get there. And that the only way to get there is to keep walking down that single solitary path. And to not jump around and always change their minds or go after something else. In which case they just end up having nothing stable in their life, nothing concrete, and having tons and tons of separations. Okay? So this is a very difficult combination when you see the Saturn Rahu there. And these people have to learn to work extremely hard in that house if they want it to work. So if you've got Saturn Rahu in the 7th house, the only way you're going to have a good relationship is if you really work hard on it. You learn everything you can about relationships. You work really hard on your relationship, and you decide to do it forever. Then it'll work. But if you go, gosh, I need this, and I need to feel loved, and I want to feel loved, and they're not loving me, so I'm going to go to someone else. No, you can't have that attitude with Saturn Rahu conjunction. You got to focus, plan, and persevere. Okay? So there's a lot more on these planets in the handout I give you. I just wanted to say a few things to give you a feel for how they work. But good planets to start with talking when you're doing counseling-centered astrology is to talk about any planets conjunct Ketu or Rahu.